The Last of Us Part 1. This long-rumored remake project has finally been revealed, along with a splashy cinematic trailer. A massive increase in quality is clearly evident, but how has the tech been pushed since the original game? How does it stack up to its 2020 sequel? And what does it say about the future of the Naughty Dog engine? A few caveats off the top. While the game is set to be released in less than 3 months, all we have to go off of at this point is a 90-second trailer, mostly composed of cinematics, along with a few high-quality screenshots. The trailer clips are fairly short, so I'll be using a lot of half-speed and quarter-speed playback. This isn't going to be a full analysis of the game, but there is a fair bit of material to review here. From the opening shot of the trailer, there's a massive improvement in visual fidelity and asset quality, comparing the PS4 Pro version of the 2014 Last of Us Remaster against the PS5 remake footage. The opening shot, which depicts a gameplay area about a third of the way into the game, has been completely redone. The buildings have new geometry and higher grade materials, lighting and shading is much more subtle and seems to be using a rather refined GI system, and high quality foliage is now flowing over the buildings. In a broad sense, the design of the area is very similar, but the underlying technology and artwork is much improved. Likewise in the following shot. Big improvements to foliage and lighting are obvious here, with a much more overgrown aesthetic than the original release. Now, in a few spots throughout the trailer, I was able to spy assets that did seem a little bit more closely derived from the original work, but most of the assets here are substantially revised, if not brand new. Almost all of the rest of the trailer is composed of story cinematics, which focus on characters. Character rendering has taken a massive step up from the original game. All the expected improvements are here, including much more realistic skin, detailed self-shadowing, true-to-life clothing, and of course completely remade models. The cinematics do seem to have been reanimated to some degree as well. Most of the changes here are on the subtler side, but are still very much appreciated. The lip sync on Joel is much more detailed here, for instance. Just look at the fine deformation of the soft areas on the lips and skin creases in the remake, versus the rather stiff movement of those elements in the original. In the original iteration of The Last of Us, eyes could look a little bit robotic. Just see how Ellie's eyes move linearly and slowly as she looks at a different point in this scene. The remake is massively improved by comparison. Notice how her eyes move much more quickly to a new focal point instead of slowly scanning the scene. And notice the subtle movement of the eyelid as her eyes change position and then refocus. There are some broader improvements as well. To illustrate, let's take a look at a scene from the original game. Focus on Ellie's facial animations here.
What are you so afraid of? I can take care of myself.
How many close calls have we had?
Well, we seem to be doing all right so far.
And now you'll be doing even better with Tommy.
There isn't much fine movement in her face here, and the rigging seems relatively simple. In the remake, the brief snippet of animation work that we have is much improved. The subtler head movements, the carefully matched lip sync, the way her eyes and eyebrows open up to punctuate her point, even the way her arm position seems to deflate a little bit in resignation, it's really top-notch stuff. The cinematics are hugely upgraded here across the board. Keep in mind as well that almost all the cinematic sequences in the original title were pre-rendered, and used much higher grade models than would have been possible in real time, while these cutscenes seem to be running live on PS5 hardware. So these comparisons actually flatter the earlier release a little bit. I recut the trailer here with capture from the 2014 remaster, and flipping between basically any set of shots, the improvement is really impressive. There is one thing that I noticed here though. Every shot in this trailer appears to have an analog in the original title, suggesting that the cutscenes may basically be a shot-for-shot recreation of the original work. The camera work and framing isn't completely identical, but it is very similar. Now that's not a bad thing really, but it does suggest that the team is hewing very closely to the original, with a focus primarily on improving fidelity. Perhaps more interesting though, is measuring this title up to The Last of Us Part 2, Naughty Dog's 2020 sequel. It's immediately clear that both titles are using similar technology. This pediatric ward shot is a perfect example. The Last of Us Part 2 includes some flashback sequences from the first game that are re-rendered in the newer engine, so there are a few places where we should be able to line up a shot from the sequel and the remake, and one such shot ended up in the trailer. These two shots have comparable camera positions and movement, and show the exact same area at the exact same time in a late game sequence from the first title. While there are some differences in lighting style between the two scenes here, we're clearly seeing a deployment of very similar tech. Some of the clutter is in different places, but elsewhere they appear near identical. If we look back at the original title here for a little bit of contrast, the scene looks much more primitive, with markedly simpler assets and lighting. The exterior environments look extremely similar between the two games as well. I managed to align an urban environment here with a parallel shot composition, and the similarities are abundantly obvious. I'm not going to belabor this too much, but the rendering tech and assets are very closely matched. If I presented these shots without labels, you might assume they were from the same game. Character rendering also seems very similar to The Last of Us Part 2. Just flipping between shots here, we can see that the models largely conform to The Last of Us Part 2's models. It's tough to line up a perfect one-to-one comparison here, but they do appear very comparable. The version of the Naughty Dog engine and overall results seem similar between the two titles. Some caveats need to be made here. Firstly, given the limited and character-focused nature of the footage that we're seeing so far, it's entirely possible that there are visually obvious improvements in other areas that will become clear later. Secondly, The Last of Us Part 2 is still a superb-looking title, so the same talent working with the same technology would hardly be a bad thing. Closing things out on the graphics side, we're going to take a look at image quality. Naughty Dog employed a little bit of a unique approach among big-budget developers towards the end of last gen, skipping over more advanced temporal upsampling techniques and even eschewing dynamic resolution. The Last of Us Part 2, Uncharted 4, and Uncharted The Lost Legacy all ran at 1080p 30 on PS4 and 1440p 30 on PS4 Pro, with a high-quality TAA but without an upsampling component to produce clearer results. Even on the PS5, Naughty Dog's titles so far have landed at 1440p as well. The Last of Us Part 2 was patched to support 60fps output at 1440p last year, while the Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection, which is a native PS5 title, is also 1440p 60 by default, though it does include a 4K 30 mode. Unfortunately, the results so far indicate that we may be getting another basic 1440p title. Just look at the resolve on the hair here. These alpha textures have the sort of noisy, aliased resolve that is characteristic of the way these elements render in The Last of Us Part 2 on PS4 Pro and PS5. Now if we move over to Uncharted 4 at 4K, hair resolves with much less aliasing and more temporal stability. There's also a much stronger treatment of geometric edges and skin detail here compared to The Last of Us Part 2 and Part 1, perhaps suggesting a lower resolution here without upsampling. I wouldn't be entirely comfortable putting a firm number on it without more extensive footage, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're dealing with a flat 1440p resolution here as well. Much like The Last of Us Part 2, the image is on the softer side overall, with a little bit of artifacting and fine details. It's safe to say that Naughty Dog's future efforts will progress beyond what we're seeing here. Perhaps like the 2014 Last of Us Remaster, this is a pipe cleaner style project to help the studio get up to speed with new console hardware. The rendering tech here still impresses, but we're not seeing clear indications of progress from the footage that we have so far. Finally, Naughty Dog has promised modernized gameplay and enhancements to combat and exploration. So is there any evidence of that in this footage? Flipping back to the opening shots of the trailer, we see landscape shots of actual traversable gameplay areas. Comparing the remake and the remaster, notice how the level layouts seem very similar. To make this more clear, I've highlighted a few points of interest here. As we flip back and forth, the location of key objects is essentially identical. The university seems much the same as well. The planters, posts, statue, and tunnel are seemingly unchanged here. The assets have been redone, the visual design has changed, and the engine has seen huge updates, but the underlying collision of the scenes seems like it would be pretty similar, with obstructions all in the same spots. There are two QuickTime event clips in the trailer as well, sequences where the player has to rapidly mash a button to overcome an enemy. The second sequence with an infected foe is a little bit more interesting. Notice how the animations line up just about perfectly with the original release. The camera movement and framing are a bit more active in the remake, but everything else, even the moment when the camera angle changes, seems identical. I have to imagine that the promised modernized gameplay will become more obvious as we get closer to launch, but so far it's not clear what's been changed. Expanded environments, better AI, and The Last of Us Part 2 style movement mechanics would be on the wish list for sure. Unfortunately though, this trailer doesn't provide much insight. The Last of Us Part 1 is a superb looking effort, a careful reworking of the original vision using modern rendering tech. Side by side with the original title, the improvements are obvious. This is a comprehensive visual overhaul. Tech-wise, some question marks remain though. Is this essentially a remake of the original title with Last of Us Part 2 technology, or are there some key improvements? Certainly what we've seen so far generally seems to indicate similar technology here, though a surprise would be welcome. Gameplay-wise, we're still largely in the dark, but the promises here are intriguing, if not exactly evident in the footage so far. However, this remake does feel a touch redundant, as the 2014 remaster is modern enough and runs very nicely at 1800p 60 on PS4 Pro and PS5. Even though the visuals do date back to the PS3, and some fine details don't hold up well at all, it's still a good looking game on the whole with very nice art direction that is easily accessible on modern platforms. Perhaps development resources could have been better used elsewhere. Still, as a fan of the series who has beaten the original game several times myself, this seems like an effort to look forward to. Naughty Dog produces some of the strongest technical work in the industry, and this remake seems like no exception. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and press the bell for YouTube notifications. To view a high quality version of this video, check out the Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch just use Twitter. Thanks for watching.